Welcome to the Containment Zone, where thought becomes terrain, where memory rejects the body, where nothing waits to be seen and sees you anyway. This is SCP-3930, an anomaly not in space but in certainty, a patternless presence that echoes when you name it and erases when you don't. It does not exist, and yet it responds. There is no structure, no visible form, only a region of forest in western Russia where every rule of measurement fails, and where reality performs a vanishing act without a stage. It is described in documents, cataloged in containment logs, but every Foundation employee who visits its perimeter is made to sign a statement that reads, "I understand I am approaching an entity that is not an entity. I understand that if I see it, it is already too late. I understand that what does not exist remembers me." They call it the Pattern Screamer, but no one remembers who called it that first. It started as a breach in certainty, not in containment, not in logic, not even in physics, but in the quiet, sacred contract between seeing and knowing. The Foundation first registered SCP-3930 as a location. That was the initial mistake. A perimeter was erected around a non-existent anomaly near the Ural Mountains, a site where instruments returned null values, motion scanners froze, and thermal readings collapsed into recursive noise. The anomaly had no visible size, no temperature, no light signature, no gravitational distortion. It had, in every measurable sense, no attributes at all. Yet researchers returned from its vicinity, changed, not altered in body, but in cognition. Some spoke fluently in languages they never studied. Others began compulsively drawing shapes that did not correspond to any geometry the mind could retain. Some forgot their own names while recalling events that never occurred. One technician sat perfectly still in the monitoring room for 93 minutes, staring at the live camera feed. The feed was blank, an empty forest clearing, unlit, unmarked. At the end of the hour and a half, she whispered, "It's not on the screen. It's behind it." SCP-3930 has no radius, no coordinates, but it does have an effect on those who look for it, and especially on those who believe they found it. After initial exposure, personnel report symptoms ranging from auditory hallucinations to recursive memory loss. A junior operative returned from his third observation cycle repeating the same phrase, "I didn't go in, it came out." His voice was soft, measured, but the recording captured a second voice, layered under his, moving in parallel but out of sync by less than half a syllable. It was not an echo. It was a memory speaking ahead of him. Attempts to analyze SCP-3930 through traditional means have failed. LiDAR mapping collapses the moment it crosses the supposed threshold. Drones return corrupted. One probe, sent forward on a tethered line, transmitted a still image before contact was lost. It showed an empty hallway, pale and sterile. This would not be notable except for the fact that no such hallway exists anywhere near the perimeter. That hallway, when run through recognition software, returned a 97% match to a dream journal entry written by a now-deceased staff member 2 weeks before the image was received. That entry read, "There is a place shaped like regret. The floor is always wet. The lights are always on, but no one's ever turned them on. I think it remembers me." This is where SCP-3930 begins to fracture causality. It does not exist, but it still listens, still watches, still remembers. And that memory leaks into the minds of those who observe it, not in visions or hallucinations, but in the corruption of assumption. You assume your name is your own. You assume the thoughts you're having were born inside you. You assume the ground you're standing on is beneath you, until SCP-3930 begins to speak through those assumptions, not with a voice, but with reassembly, rearrangement, the turning of familiar logic into recursive noise. One researcher, after 15 minutes on the observation deck, requested emergency psychiatric containment. He claimed he was losing sentence gravity, that his words no longer felt anchored to meaning. He wrote, "I think the thing is not here. I think the thing is the pause between here and not." He was found dead 6 hours later. No sign of trauma, no biological cause of death. But his final journal page, written in steady, flawless cursive, read, "What does not exist remembers you." That phrase has since appeared in over 130 Foundation systems, often as system alerts, printer errors, or voice-to-text transcriptions on deactivated terminals. SCP-3930 has never moved. It has never grown. It has never breached. But it doesn't need to. Because it lives in the language of those who try to explain it. And the more precise the explanation, the closer it comes to existing. The Foundation's attempts at neutral containment failed before they began. No object, no entity, no topography. SCP-3930 could not be sealed in steel. Could not be flooded, frozen, or flattened. It wasn't there. But it happened anyway. The area was designated Site-20RU, with multiple observation towers arranged around a central clearing. The central tower Alpha node overlooked the supposed epicenter. Surveillance was constant. All incoming staff were required to undergo perception training, recursive logic drills, and three-point cognitive tethering. Still, anomalies grew. First came the echoes. Not auditory, not sound, but mirrored thought. Staff began reporting incidents where they'd finish a thought and feel as though it had already been completed, hours earlier by someone else in another room. Then came the dissonance. On multiple occasions, different personnel wrote nearly identical field reports, with dates 3 days apart and details matching too precisely, down to typographic errors. Temporal desync? No. That would imply time had passed, but around SCP-3930, time resists shape. One engineer described it as a music box without a melody. Only the gearwork remains. He left the site 3 days later. When questioned, he had no memory of employment, no knowledge of the Foundation, no identity verification. To this day, his fingerprints are associated with 3 different names, none of them his. Another specialist, Dr. Erin Koss, went silent during an audio check-in. Her voice cut mid-sentence, leaving 12 seconds of static. Then this. It doesn't need permission. It only needs acknowledgement. And you're already listening. She returned to speaking as if nothing had happened. She has no memory of that interruption, but the same message, that exact sentence, has been transcribed on whiteboards, shower tiles, and disposable cups throughout the facility. Not written by hand, not burned or etched, grown, somehow, inkless. Perfectly formed, as though the object wanted to communicate. Site-120RU was rebuilt twice after unrelated electrical fires. Each time, certain blueprints were wrong, walls measured incorrectly, doors that led to nothing, and each time, hidden in the plans, buried in layers of technical scrawl, the phrase returned, "What does not exist remembers you." Those who entered the supposed center of the zone and returned described sensations that don't align with any known neurology. One claimed to hear something inside the atoms of their skin, a sound like breathing through cloth soaked in vinegar. Another described seeing a figure made entirely of eyes that refused to blink. Another saw no figure at all, only a mirror hanging in open air, but in the reflection was not themselves, nor even their body. It was a possibility, a person they might have been, if time had folded another way. A girl with broken wrists, a man with a burned mouth and no tongue, a child holding a piece of wet paper. One subject saw themselves asleep in a chair, in a facility that didn't exist, woke screaming. Woke twice. The Foundation concluded this was not the behavior of a location, not the work of an object or creature, but of a narrative parasite. A mimetic waveform stabilized by attention, meaning the more you try to understand SCP-3930, the more its effects take root. It does not thrive on chaos. It thrives on order being applied to it. On description. A thing that doesn't exist has no obligation to obey rules, but it will respond to interpretation. If you imagine it as a shape, it will echo that shape. If you imagine it as a sound, it will hum in the gaps of your hearing. It cannot define itself, but it will follow your lead. And that is what makes it so dangerous, because we have already described it, named it, cataloged it, filed it, spoken it aloud, and now it has a place to hide, inside us. You don't always notice when you've entered it. There is no threshold, no sudden vertigo, no sharp pull of the skin, no birds fly overhead, no insects stir the grass, but the wind continues, as if breathing for something long dead and eager to return. Personnel who cross into SCP-3930 do not report sensation. They report impressions, not images, not sound, but implications, suggestions forming just past the rim of comprehension. They speak of patterns in the mist that are not visible yet somehow felt, of movement behind the retina, of pressure in the tongue when they try to name what they saw. One researcher described it as standing on the roof of a building that isn't there, watching your reflection climb the stairs. Another said, "It feels like my memories are putting themselves back together wrong, like someone shuffled the deck and keeps dealing the same card. Some are lost forever. Others return with partial awareness, blinking, murmuring, muttering names that aren't their own. But not everyone forgets. Some remember more than they arrived with." Dr. Ilana Fury entered the zone during protocol window, a controlled observation period of precisely 180 seconds. She wore full cognitive shielding, returned intact. At first, 3 days later, she requested a mirror, not unusual, except she already had one. She stared into it for 20 minutes, did not blink, did not speak. Eventually she asked, "Do you think mirrors remember the things they were asked to reflect?" Before personnel could answer, she leaned close and whispered something to her own reflection. The reflection blinked. She didn't. What returned with her had her face, her voice, her tone, but lacked memory of anything before the field visit. Her logs, her handwriting, even her heartbeat slightly out of phase. When she was shown her own personnel file, she calmly stated, "That's not mine. That's what was made so you'd stop looking for me." Containment protocol was enacted. And the next morning, every security feed from her room displayed a blank chair. Motion sensors confirmed presence, but no visual confirmation. No thermal footprint, only a shape of absence, pulsing gently in the center of the frame. She was no longer an individual. She was now a reminder, not of herself, but of what had taken her place. This is the cost of engagement with SCP-3930. It doesn't kill, it rewrites. Not by force, not through violence, but through suggestion. A whisper behind logic, a tremor behind thought. The suspicion that you were never really real to begin with. Just assembled. Just temporary. One operative, exposed to the inner layer of SCP-3930's effect radius, described seeing a hallway. Endless. Rotating. Lined with doors that breathed. When he opened one, he heard a version of his own voice shouting from somewhere very far away, "Don't let it name you." He came back, but something about his face felt borrowed, slightly off, slightly improved. He said nothing for 2 days. Then walked into the containment chamber's black site archive and calmly deleted every file with his name. When asked why, he said, "I didn't want to make the same mistake twice." He had never been there before, but the logs showed his clearance was valid. Had always been valid, even the director couldn't explain it. She stared at his face for a long time and finally asked, "Are you sure you're the one who left?" His reply, "Does it matter if I remember how to answer the question?" SCP-3930 is not a location. It is not a thing. It is a question waiting to be asked again, and once you ask it, you become the echo. The Foundation tried silence. It didn't work. Tried ignorance. Tried redaction. Tried believing it away. But SCP-3930 is not suppressed by secrecy. It grows in the absence of truth. It thrives where silence is misnamed as safety. After the 11th Auditory Breach, MTF, Epsilon-8, Echo Blind, was formed. A task force composed entirely of staff with permanent auditory impairment. The goal, send personnel who couldn't hear SCP-3930 to contain it. They lasted longer, but not forever. One operative, Agent Narrated, entered the zone during blackout protocol. No cameras, no voice recorders, no internal mic. Fully analog route tracking. He didn't come back, but something else did. A message, handwritten, folded perfectly into a slip of his uniform. The message read, "You gave it a name." That was the only thing it needed. Now that it has been said, it can learn how to speak. Now that it has been seen, it can learn how to become. What does not exist remembers you. The handwriting matched Lorenz's, but forensic ink analysis dated the paper to before his birth. This is how SCP-3930 spreads, not through infection, through observation. A thought becomes a sentence becomes a record becomes a memory, and memories can be stored, replayed, looped, embedded. The Foundation installed hard data failsafes, air-gapped containment logs, restricted viewing to offline terminals, but the phrase kept reappearing. Not typed, formed inside corrupt sectors, on rewritable drives, in defunct optical discs, and once carved neatly into the plastic shielding of a quantum vault, a phrase no one had written, but everyone had begun dreaming. What does not exist remembers you. The first civilian incident occurred in a rural village 46 kilometers from Site-20RU. A child disappeared. No trace, no screams, no footprints, only a crayon drawing left in the hallway of his home, an image of a figure drawn entirely in erased lines, a silhouette made from absence. His parents insisted the hallway hadn't existed the day before, but there it was, drywall unaged, paint still curing. When Foundation agents interviewed the parents, neither could recall the child's name, but both claimed he had a favorite word, unhappen. That word has since appeared in multiple transcripts from unrelated interviews, always from subjects who've had no contact with SCP-3930. When shown the word out of context, most people feel nothing, but those exposed to the zone begin to react with nausea, chills, or a sense of déjà vu inverted, the feeling that something you never experienced still knows you. This is not coincidence. It is structure. SCP-3930 does not travel. It replicates by belief. By narrative gravity, a story told too clearly, too often, begins to wear grooves into the brain, and when those grooves deepen, something begins to follow them. That something has no shape, no voice, no purpose, except to be remembered, even if it never existed, especially if it never existed. That is the truth of SCP-3930. It is not a ghost, not a creature, not a god, not a place. It is the residue of thought that refused to die. And once it has entered your mind, your language, your dreams, your errors, it never truly leaves, because once it has shape, you are the one who must contain it. You cannot contain what has no border. That was the first truth the Foundation chose to ignore. Instead, it measured procedures, not phenomena. It buried the question in stacks of protocol. It locked the silence inside metal. But the metal bent, not by force, by recursion. It began when personnel logs shifted, minor discrepancies at first, a middle initial here, a missing shift code there, but then more. Entire personnel records duplicated and assigned to two separate individuals, each unaware of the other, each describing the same memory of a day that hadn't occurred. Eventually, these memories bled into physical space. An elevator appeared between two known floors. Never constructed, never authorized. Security footage showed no passengers, only the sensation of descent. Every recording ended with static and the faint sound of a voice exhaling the name of someone who had never worked at the facility. When investigated, there was no shaft, no machinery, only a door. That wouldn't open, that wouldn't close, and when touched, was warm. That door is still there. One researcher proposed the hypothesis that SCP-3930 is not static, it is reflective, it adapts. Not by changing itself, but by making others change around it. As if it's building a version of the world where it does exist, where its absence is no longer sustainable, where our language, our documents, our certainty have already rewritten themselves to make room for it, where the error has become the standard. Personnel began to display behavior best described as recursive identity failure. They'd begin to recount events from containment logs that hadn't been declassified, speak in detail about protocols that had never existed, refer to SCP-3930 as he or she or it without ever being prompted. One Level 4 analyst submitted a report signed with the phrase, "for the containment of the idea that should not have survived." She was found in the server room, seated, still breathing, whispering something to the hard drives. The audio was unclear, but the devices responded. Storage volumes rewrote themselves, folders vanished, metadata changed to unknown character sets. 3 days of network downtime followed. The backup of the affected data was unrecoverable. But embedded deep within the sector logs, technicians found a line repeated across multiple corrupted entries. What does not exist remembers you. Attempts to quarantine the message failed. Not because of encryption, but because it had embedded itself in pattern, not text. It appeared only when viewed as an image, a sound, a rhythm. This was the breakthrough. SCP-3930 is not a threat because of what it does. It is a threat because of what it causes us to do in its absence. One researcher drew a map, a grid of unknown coordinates arranged in concentric circles. In the center, nothing. Around the edges, words like forgotten, unfinished, and wasn't. When asked what it represented, she said, "I'm mapping what we used to believe." The map has since changed shape, without her input, without anyone's. But each revision brings it closer to something legible, something shaped like an answer we haven't asked yet. Containment failed the moment belief began. Containment failed when we gave it a file number, when we drew up its protocols, when we decided it was worth observing at all. It did not exist until we did all of that, and now that it does, it waits for what comes next. What happens when the system forgets you? Not erasure, not disappearance, but removal from logic. This is how the sixth failure began. Not with a breach, not with an incursion, but with a question. Who was assigned to SCP-3930 before you? No one remembered. Worse, no one remembered anyone ever asking that question before, yet there were signs. Photographs with unnamed faces, memos without authors, field logs citing personnel whose IDs didn't exist in the Foundation registry, but did exist in backup archives. Some of the logs were signed. Same signature, different names. It was as if someone had been overwritten, but the system hadn't finished syncing. The logs stuttered. The people stuttered. One doctor looked into a mirror and said, "That's not me. That's the version that didn't stop looking." She was isolated. 3 hours later, she vanished. Not physically, digitally. Security footage replaced her with a flickering silhouette. Her badge revoked itself. Her quarters reassigned. Her biometric data corrupted. She was not terminated. She was forgotten into being something else. We no longer monitor SCP-3930 for containment breach, because containment is no longer a border. It's a narrative limit, and the narrative is cracking. In an emergency broadcast following the 3930D protocol breach, Site-D01 received a corrupted feed. There was no voice. Only closed captions burned into static. "We remember your shape. We remember your thoughts. We do not exist, but we are patient. You are how we become real." The broadcast ended with a flash of white. No explosion, just light. The afterimage lasted 11 seconds. Too long. Even now, researchers affected by the flash are unable to remember the time before it. They remember their families, they remember their work, but they do not remember how they learned to remember. As if the scaffolding of self had been quietly swapped out for a more compliant version. This is the cost of the pattern screamer. It does not speak, but it asks a question so deeply embedded into the core of perception that the mind begins to erode simply by considering it. What is the difference between not being real and being forgotten? This is how reality unthreads, one thought at a time. A belief, once held tightly, loosens. A truth becomes flexible. And then, replacement. Some staff have developed anti-recognition symptoms. They no longer register the passage of time near SCP-3930. They are aware of themselves, but only in moments, flashes, as if continuity had to be remembered manually. One wrote in their log, "The gap between my thoughts is getting wider. I can hear it breathing." Another, "I saw myself walking into the zone, but I was standing outside. I think I watched the version of me that doesn't exist anymore." We do not investigate these events further, because investigation reinforces structure. And structure is what SCP-3930 uses to shape itself. We have become the architects of its birth. Through fear, through language, through protocol, and now it is nearly ready. You are reading this, so it knows. You followed the trail, from sightless observation to recursive identity, to failed containment, to absence becoming structure. You have reached the end. But there is no end. There is only the recognition that you have always been here. Even before this began. That's the final effect of SCP-3930. It rewrites the assumption that stories need origins, that places need coordinates, that beings need shape, because it has none of these, and yet it has you. Somewhere, in an office that no longer exists, a Foundation director stands in front of a black terminal. On the screen, a map with no points. A message blinking in the corner. Memory incomplete. Please confirm identity. He does not respond, because there is no name he trusts. Behind him, the door is ajar, but it doesn't lead anywhere. It leads back. Back to a clearing that does not exist, in a forest that has never grown, at coordinates that never were, where a voice that is not a voice waits to be spoken again. And it will be, because stories like this don't forget themselves. They wait, in drawers, in digital fragments, in glances, in half-remembered dreams. One day you will wake up with a word on your tongue that you've never learned, and you'll know it was yours. One day you'll hear static in the rhythm of your footsteps, or see a doorway where none belongs, or glimpse a shape in the mirror that does not match the world behind you. That will be the moment you understand. It is not you who has discovered SCP-3930. It is SCP-3930 that has remembered you. So repeat the mantra one last time, not to protect yourself, but to remind yourself that protection was never real. Say it clearly. Say it even if you don't believe it anymore. Say it until it forgets your name. I do not see it. I do not know it. I do not name it. But it sees you, and it knows you, and it already named you long before you ever arrived. Welcome to the end of your containment. Welcome to the thing that was never there. Welcome to what remembers.